Hi, hey everyone. Oh, I'm so happy to be guest hosting this version of the IGDA Winnipeg Let's Play. I'm Matt Welk. I'm here with the wonderful Mike Berg. Mike is a board game developer. He lives out in the country with his wonderful family who loves board games as much or maybe more than he does. Let's be honest. He has a wonderful dog as well, which I have to mention because Willow has my whole heart. And Mike, during the day, does freelance art for video games. So, Mike, welcome here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Oh, no problem. So today we're going to be looking at some of your games. Now you might be wondering, Matt, you said board games. This looks like a video game. What's going on here? This is this is Tabletop Simulator. So Mike has physical versions of board games, but also these digital ones that you can play right now. So we're gonna go through. I'm gonna ask him a whole bunch of questions about all of these, and we're gonna peel back the layers of Mike's brain and figure out what it takes to design a board game. So, Mike, let's kick it off. Let's kick it off. How many board games have you designed? How long have you been doing this? What's your story?
Oh, it's funny actually. The first real game that I designed probably would be a game called Crown Rivals, which is just a card game that you can play. Um, Actually, that's not even true, but I'll describe Crown Rivals first. Um, it's a card game that you can play with regular playing cards. I really got into a card game called Star Realms. It's a fairly popular deck building game. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if it would be possible to make a deck building game that you can play with a regular deck of playing cards so that anyone could play a deck building game without having to go out and buy custom cards. And so I made a little deck building game called Crown Rivals. It's very heavily inspired from Star Realms, and that is just a rules PDF that you can download off of my itch page and
Nice.
give it a try. And so that's kind of one of the first games that I sort of fully released. Now the sort of actual first game that I released is called Yard Builder. I didn't really release it because it wasn't very good. I made a game that was pulling tiles out of a bag, and there was like a couple hundred tiles or something. It was ridiculous. Um, and you would draw three, and then you would lay two of them on a grid that was your yard, and then you would pass the next one to the person sitting to the left of you, and they would choose two more from the bag and the one that you gave them, and they would have to choose two from that, and then it would go on. And in that game, you would get different amounts of points for positioning yard features next to each other. So if you had a trampoline, for example, it scored more points if there was clear grass around it and no other obstructions so that you didn't hurt yourself falling off the trampoline. And like a barbecue would make a deck more valuable, and you try to build a house of a certain shape, and then you could get bonus points for that. Now, the reason I say that I didn't really make that game first is because I more recently redid that game as what's called a roll and write game, which is, if you've ever played Yahtzee, then that's basically probably the most famous roll and write ever. But there's a whole slew of games in this category now where players roll dice and then use the results of the dice to write something on their paper. And so I changed Yard Builder, or I ported Yard Builder into a roll and write, and now you roll three dice, and the dice results give you the tiles that you can then draw on a piece of paper. So everyone gets their own playmat, and you just draw your tiles, and it everyone can play at the same time. So the game went a lot faster. Before it was a real slog. And it has this really neat element of just being able to draw, and it's meant to be very relaxing, and you kind of you can draw your tiles however you like and sort of design this little yard, and so it's very chill. a fun game to play together with a bunch of people, and you can play it very easily over Zoom. I know my brother's family really likes the game because they can all still just sit in their own chair in their living room and still all play a game together. Yeah, that's kind of those are sort of my first two games. And Crown Rivals came out. I think that was the first tabletop game that I put on my itch page, and it came out on my birthday 2 years ago. This past April 2nd. So since then, I have made a few more games.
And we're gonna look at lots of them. You mentioned itch. That's itch.io. Is that a common place to find like downloadable board games or other types of board games?
Yeah, so a lot of people put they're called print and play games. So you can um, all of my games, for example, you can download as PDFs and print out the cards or other components, and then just cut out the cards and play them. And it's just a really affordable, easy way to share games um, that are especially games that are still in development because it's easy to, it's easy to change them. It's really not it's super hard to print out a new copy and cut out the cards and maybe stick them in sleeves so they're a little easier to handle or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty great. Yeah, there are a lot of indie card games and board games, lots of RPGs on itch for sure.
So I have Card Shark Pool here, and I wanted to talk about this one first because, um, like pool or billiards or whatever is a game of angles, and it's a game of like physical. It's a dexterity game, really. Um, I'm curious how you translated that into a card game. So maybe what we'll do is you can walk us through kind of the basics of how this game works, and then I'll just ask you questions as we go.
Well, can I talk a bit about the design goals that I had
Oh,
for it first?
please. Yeah, 100%.
Because I started participating in some design challenges online, and Board Game Geek has contests regularly. People post design contests for board games on Board Game Geek, and then I also started to become involved in the Button Shy community. Button Shy is a small publishing company that is really wonderful. They specialize in 18 card wallet games, and so they used to have before the pandemic. They used to have design challenges where they would say, we're looking for this type of game, um, make it and submit it, and you might get published. And so this was not for that, but I was thinking about the challenges and I was like, oh, he's probably going to come up with some ridiculous restriction and make it like something totally impossible and stupid, like make the pool into a card game, because that would be ridiculous. Like, who would ever want to play pool as a card game? And then, of course, my brain started thinking about how to make pool into a card game, and here we are. um, so I I wanted to make it into a very approachable game that still felt like pool, but did not have a bunch of complex like angles and bounces, and you would have to have like a rule book full of charts to describe how a ball should move. I did not want to do any of that. I didn't want to have to calculate um, anything like that. And I know that's a big part of pool, but that was just not what I wanted to have in a
And
casual
there are games like that,
card
like
game.
the Star Wars TIE Fighter game where you get out like a
Right.
ruler and you sweep certain angles.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I wanted this to be something that you could pull out at a restaurant while you were waiting for a table. And so the way this works is you decide who's going to shoot first and who's going to shoot solids and stripes, just like in pool. And we've got the cue ball is here. So say I was shooting stripes, I might shoot for basically it has the closer the ball is to you, the easier it is to hit. And there's some dice rolls that you have to make. Um, it's sort of a Yahtzee style dice mini game every time you try to make a shot. So, and you get a certain number of re-rolls depending on how close the ball is to the cue ball.
Oh,
Uh,
so these cards are laid out as if this is the like the pool table, like the
yes,
physical space matters here.
yeah, yeah. And so once these balls are in place, the grid sort of stays where it is. Like you can see there's little white outlines around each spot. Like the cards kind of all stay where they are. Now sometimes the balls bounce around. They do bounce around and change positions with each other. And the way that happens is if you make a shot. So do you want to zoom in on one of the cards?
Yep. Here.
So if you make a shot, so for this 13, um, you choose a card adjacent to the cue ball, and you may swap its position with any card on the table. So if I made this shot, I would actually doing my dice rolls, I'd actually move this out of the way and put the cue ball where this 13 was. And then I would read this card, and it says, okay, now I can choose a card adjacent to the cue ball and swap its position with any other card on the table. And this card that I sank actually gets flipped. So that's now counts as like an empty space on the table. So it's just the green colored felt. So
Oh.
now if I wanted to bring another card closer, I could choose, it said I could choose a card and swap it with any other card on the table. I might take this one and swap it with this one. So these balls are kind of bouncing around, and I've set up my shot a little bit so that I've got cards that are closer to me. So now I could keep my run going, go for the 11, and maybe curl back around this way, and then go out here to the 12, and then maybe to the 9, and then I would have to take a longer shot to try and get the 10 in, if I was not able to, bounce the balls around to get them, so you kind of manipulate the table a little bit as you take your shots and try and set up your next shot. And then if you
So
miss, so
Mhm.
based on your dice rolls, if you miss, then there's also something that happens if you miss that ball. So this 11, it says your opponent may shuffle and redeal any row. So then they might, pick up all these cards and shuffle them out and redeal them to try and get the balls that you're going for farther away from you, or maybe get a better layout for their own ball.
So like 8 ball. It's 2-player, one person
Yeah.
is stripes, one person is solids. Does that mean it's my turn?
Yes.
Oh, right. So I roll these dice first?
Well, at first you would say which ball you're going to shoot for.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Is it a bad idea to go for this 3 on the right?
So in the rule book, there's a little chart. If you want to open the rule book and go to page 4.
Yep, I am there.
So then that shows you how many re-rolls you get depending on how far away the ball is. And what you're going for is to get either a pair of 1s or a pair of 6s, or any straight. So 2, 3, 4, or 4, 5, 6. So if you were going for this 3, you would get 1 re-roll. So if you rolled all 3 dice.
Okay, here's my first roll.
Okay, so you've got a 5 and a 6. So you've got 1 re-roll. So you could try and go for roll that to get a 4, or you could have tried to re-roll like both of these to try to get a 6. Because if you got a pair of 6s or a pair of 1s, then you would have
So
something,
I did
right?
not succeed.
So you did not succeed. So then you would read this. My opponent may shuffle and redeal any row. So I would then maybe take these cards, shuffle them. That didn't work. And put them back on the row. This is one of the challenges of Tabletop Simulator, is that it sometimes is wonky.
So in Tabletop Simulator, I notice some things are like it's just physics doing physics and things land on other things and physics happens. And
Yeah.
other things, they, like, snap to certain spots.
Yeah.
How
So
how much control do you have?
you can set up snap points on the table, and you can draw. Like I drew, there's a tool for drawing on the table, so I drew these white boxes where all the cards go, and then I set snap points into the middle of the boxes, um, so that the cards, like you can see that it kind of ghosts to the snap point there. Or maybe you can't see that. Maybe I can only
Here,
see
I'll
that
do
on
it
my
here.
screen.
Yeah. There it is.
So yeah, there's a bunch of interesting things that you can do with snap points to make your game easier to play. You can also set snap points on cards. So if you have tokens that like if a card is used as a tracker or something, then the snap point can snap cubes onto the card, and we'll see that in some of my other games.
Nice, nice. Okay, well, it's your turn.
Oh, am I? Are we? Can we keep going here? Okay, so
Just
I'm
a
gonna
little
go for
bit.
the. I'll go for the 11, and I've got. I better. So because I'm right next to it, I can get 2 rerolls. So I'm gonna roll this twice. I'm gonna try and go for get a 3. Oops, that didn't work. Hang on, I have them all
It
selected.
was a,
Okay, so if I get okay, I need a 3. Nope. Okay, so I missed. So oh, this one is also you may shuffle and redeal any row. Okay, so if you wanted, you could shuffle and redeal a row.
oh, I will choose not to.
Okay,
Oh, and so, this 15 would be adjacent, and so would this 14, right?
yeah,
Based on this diagram.
but you are solids, so you have to
Oh,
shoot for the 3 here or the 5, which would give you 1 reroll. If you
oh,
shoot out past, if it's 2 rows away, then all anything here or here would be uh, 0 rerolls, I believe.
I can shoot through balls to other balls, like, I could go for this one?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
because this is representative of a big table that is wide open or much more open than this, right? So and yeah, you can shoot. You could sink any ball, even if it's in the middle of the table, from anywhere. Basically, you just have to make the
ah,
roll.
so I'm seeing the elements of pool that are coming in, like, the distance matters, like, it's tougher to make a longer shot.
Yeah,
And of course, I'm going for solids, you're going for stripes. So I guess it could have made sense for me to reshuffle the second row because then maybe my solids would be closer.
yeah.
Nice. Well, let's look at some more games. We've got lots to look
Okay.
at today. What should we do next, Mike?
Uh, oh,
There's one you mentioned that had some brand new art. Which was that one?
that's ExoBase. So ExoBase is my solo game. So that's my first fairly larger scale game. Now, this was originally designed to be a much larger game, and then I, again, because of my involvement in the Button Shy community, tried to squeeze the whole game down into 18 cards, and I almost did it. Um,
Oh, right. You mentioned there's a special category of board games that's 18 cards that fits in your wallet.
yeah.
Is that a common like would I know any games under that name? What are some common games?
Well, the Button Shy's biggest game is called Sprawlopolis, which is mostly solo. I think it's played mostly solo, but you can play it co-op as well with a couple people. And it's a city building game, and you lay colored city cards down. You can overlap them. You try and build combos based on some scoring conditions, which are on the backs of the cards. So you start the game by drawing 3 scoring condition cards, and then those are what you need to sort of defeat by arranging the city cards in a certain way. That's by far their most popular game. They just released a second version of it called Agropolis, which is more farm based. They also have a game called Tussie Mussy, which is by the designer of Wingspan, Elizabeth Hargrave,
Ooh,
and it is about giving flower bouquets to people that you like and sometimes that you don't like.
Oh, ho, ho, ho,
As it
ho.
turns out
Like us
that,
giving a sarcastic bouquet or,
yeah,
you
there are
people who don't even deserve it?
some flowers that have certain meanings, and so the meanings are on the bottoms of all the cards, and there's some that are like, "You have deceived me," stuff like that. So,
That is so nice.
yeah.
For our viewers who are on Twitch, feel free to throw questions in the chat. I am watching, and we love questions. So tell me about this game, ExoBase. It's a solitaire game,
Yeah.
and by solitaire I mean one player, not necessarily like solitaire style game, like the typical.
It is definitely not solitaire style. It is a solo game, and so it is. My goal with this was to make a worker placement game that was card based, and by worker placement game I mean there are games like, oh, what's a good example that's common? Stone Age, for example, is one.
Or Catan.
Catan's not really worker placement.
You have a single
The
worker.
usually what happens in a worker placement game is each player has a number of workers that are like pawns or tokens, and they place them around the board, and on the different spaces on the board there are different benefits that you can gain. And so you might put like farmers. So Agricola is a fairly common one
Mm,
as well.
mhm,
That's a
mhm.
farming one. And so you in Agricola you have a farming family, and you put your farmers out on different spaces, and then they might gather different resources, and you use those resources to on later turns when you put your worker on a build space, and then that lets you build a new building, for example, which may give you more resources. And so you build up um, your engine, kind of is sort of the board game term for this kind of thing. And as you build it, it gives you more capabilities and more resources, and then that lets you do more things in a turn. And so what I wanted to do with ExoBase is build a worker placement game that was card based, so that it was different every time, because the cards might come up in a different order, or you might lay them out in a different way. And so you start out here with these 4 cards, and that's your core base. And your 4 workers are these characters over here, which are represented by, you would take a purple pawn for the purple guy and put it on the hab. I've got a yellow guy. I've got the green botanist, and I've got the orange construction person. Okay, so now these are my 4 workers that I have in my hab, and I can place them each turn. I can take each of these 4 workers and place them on any of the workspaces. So there's workspaces here. I don't know if you want to zoom in on one of these cards. I
Mhm.
can't see what you're zoomed in on, but um, the green boxes on the right hand side are workspaces. And so if I wanted this person to work here, then on this turn they would receive the two minerals. And if I put this person here, then they would heal 2 health, because there's the little green crosses, health. And so on your founder cards here, they have health bars on the right hand side, and so you'd put one of your markers like that on there to keep track of their health, because some places where you work are actually kind of dangerous. So if you were to work here at this extractor, the bottom right work space has a little red 3 and a cross beside it there. So
Mhm.
you would need to roll 3 dice, and if you roll a 4, 5, or 6, then you take a damage from one of those. A damage for each die that rolls more than a 4, or 4 or more, I should say. So you have to kind of manage the health of your workers in this, but then as you gather more resources, so there's task cards up here. These are just other places where you can work, and so there's the green spaces on here where you can place a worker to get those resources. Once you've built up enough resources to build a new location on your base, this is where you would buy a new location. So if I had, for this extractor, 3 minerals and 1 metal, then I would place place my worker here, and then I would keep track of all of my resources down here. But then I would spend those resources, and then I would be able to take this card and add it onto my base. And so the cards, once they're added onto your base, then you can work at the spaces that are um, the workspaces on these locations. And the doors also need to line up. So this card could go here because these doors line up, but you could not put it here because there's no door here. So the placement of your cards matters a little bit too. This card also has a bonus in the top left, just next to the name, that says it's +1 if it's adjacent to another red card. So another extraction card. So this is a red card itself. So there's that little icon with the little gray icon with the red dot in the middle. And that indicates what type of card that is. So if I could place this next to another red card, then I would get +1 resource from working these spaces. Does that all
What
make sense?
yeah, it does. What is the win and or lose condition of this game?
Okay, so the win condition is down here. This is the resource production tracker. And so the goal is to build a base that is self-sustaining before this time tracker runs out. And this is when it ends, that's when the colony ship arrives. And if you haven't built a base that is self-sustaining by then you have lost. Because there's other colonists that are coming and they want the base to be ready for them. So the setting is that you are on a distant exoplanet and building a base in sort of a harsh environment. And to do that, you need to upgrade your locations as well, because each of the purple boxes with an icon in them indicates that you would then increase your production of that resource. So if I upgrade this extractor to level 3, then I would increase my gas production by 1.
And if
And
you upgrade this extractor, that also means the worker on it, like here they had to roll a 4 or higher,
yeah,
but it would be like the penalty is less or the gain is better if it's
yeah,
upgraded as well?
yeah. And so your every location can be upgraded 3 times or 2 times, I guess. It has 3 levels of upgradableness. But they also need to be powered. And so for example, your power station here generates 4 electricity right now. And if you upgrade it, then you would get another 2 electricity or 2 power. So then I would take 2 more cubes out of here and put them on my power bank. And then when I upgrade a location, some of them have 2 little lightning bolts on here. So if I had this upgraded to level 2, I would just move that up. But if I wanted to upgrade it to level 3, I'd have to actually take another cube and put it on here like that. And
Ah,
new locations also need to be powered. So this extractor that I built would also need to have a power block on there just to be at level 1. So you have to keep building. Here's a solar panels card, for example. This would let you power more locations if you added this onto your base.
I see, it's all coming together. We have a question from the chat from Overtone Warp Zone, which says, "Did you say this game was only 18 cards? That's such an efficient use of physical resource as a game designer." I'll tag on to that. You mentioned, it was tough to squeeze this into 18 cards. How close did you get, or what did you have to change about the design to squeeze it into 18 cards?
That is an excellent question. Now, um, first of all, I got very close to it. If I didn't have individual founder cards and I didn't have these resource trackers, it would all be 18 cards. Now, there were some changes as I developed the game that I just felt like it made more sense to have this and to add it. And I wanted to also have 8 founder cards, so that there was some variability too, because each of the founders has different abilities.
Do you want me
Um,
to play with 4? Like, for the whole game, it's a random 4?
that's right.
Ah.
You could choose four if you like four of them or whatever. It's a solo game. You play however you want. But yeah, generally you would shuffle the founder deck of 8 cards and then just deal 4 out, and that's who you would play with. Um, the original design for this was to actually have progression in that there would be these work cards and there would be a whole deck of work cards, these task cards, sorry. And as you progress through the game, as the game went on, these would become more and more valuable. Like the amount of resources you would get would be higher, or there might be more risk to them as well. But at the beginning, it would be like kind of baby steps, and then they would get progressively better. Um, but to do that, it would have required separating each deck. So this task row would have had to be 4 separate decks that you would shuffle each individually and then create, a separate draw pile that had the progression built into it. So that was kind of the original idea. I thought that would be neat to have that progression and feeling of story. Um, and it would give me a little bit more freedom as far as storytelling goes, but eventually I decided to scrap that. Now, some of the things that were neat that came out of squeezing it into 18 cards is that I decided to put the location cards on the back of the task cards. So all of these cards are double-sided, and all of them have locations on one side and tasks on the other. And what's neat about that is if you build something from this row, you actually take a card from this task row and add it back into this location row. So there's always 3 cards in each of these rows.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of a day, if I've built something here, then I actually take one of these cards and put it into this empty space. Now the neat thing is I can actually the rule is that I can actually look at the backs of these and decide which one I want most. So it because it's so tight with how many resources you get and which buildings it would benefit you, I might choose, oh, this one gives me lots of minerals, so I think I want to take this one this time. I'd put this one back here, put this one back, and so now I've also got a new card, a new task here that gives me a new workspace.
So for that 18 card challenge, does that mean we wouldn't be allowed to have dice? We couldn't have all these tokens. Like it has to be just 18 cards, and that's the entire equipment set.
It depends on the challenge, right? So the button shy challenges they often had their own set of rules, and each one was different. Sometimes they were no other components. Sometimes you could use dice, or you could have 2 or 3 dice and a couple of cubes or something like that. Really, it just depends on the requirements of the person who's putting on a challenge.
Have
This
you?
this game was not designed for a challenge.
Oh, just inspired by a challenge.
Yeah,
Have you participated in any other challenges?
I have, and this one I have actually just redone all the artwork for this game so that I can submit it to a challenge um, by Gabe from the Board Game Design Lab, which is a podcast, a fairly popular board game design podcast. And he's putting on it's called a solo duo challenge, and it's specifically for solo games or games that can be played with 1 or 2 people. But it does
Ah,
have to be soloable for sure. And so that is happening on a website called The Game Crafter, which is a print-on-demand service for board games, which is pretty neat. And that deadline for that is coming up very quickly. It's May 14th, so I'm hoping to get this ready to submit for that contest.
so you've mentioned 3 different ways of getting your board games to people. One was here on Tabletop Simulator. One was the print and play, where you download a PDF, print it, chop it up, and the other was this print on demand. Um, Those are all pretty new ways of doing things. Like the classic way to get a board game is you go to a store, and they have a whole bunch, and they're all wrapped and ready to go, and you pluck
Yeah.
one off the shelf, and you go to the cashier, and then you drive it home. Um, what new options do all these new ways of making board games give that the classic ways don't?
I think that the huge benefit for us as designers is just the the ease of distribution. And so finding people to play test your game is a lot easier if you've already set up the game in Tabletop Simulator and you're like, okay, let's just hop into Tabletop Simulator and we can play the game for half an hour. Um, and nobody has to even do anything other than own Tabletop Simulator. Um, but yeah, being able to distribute a printable PDF is just really wonderful for again the same reason. Lots of people really don't like using Tabletop Simulator. It is clunky and fiddly, and there's just something to physically holding something in your hand that board gamers like. Um, it's just sort of a natural tendency, and so being able to send out a PDF that people can print and try out on their own is just a um, really big benefit for a designer. And then the game crafter is kind of the next level. It's sort of like these print on demand t-shirt services, except they make board game components, and they have templates and everything for submitting your artwork, and you can say, okay, here's my deck of cards, and these are the components that I want to include, and this is the type of box I want, and this is the artwork that I want on the box, and they will literally print the entire thing and send you one copy.
Hmm.
And that if that's your goal, to get a prototype that feels like a real board game, it's it's not super affordable for like doing a large number of them, but if you really want one game, it's pretty cool. And so I'm excited to get this game up on there and make it available for sale because it is fairly small component count, so it shouldn't be too expensive even on there.
Quite different from the 200 tile game you mentioned before, right?
Yes. Well, and that one's so easy to distribute now because you just print one page and then you're ready to go.
Hmm. You mentioned the art. The art in this game is beautiful, especially like this rule book is perfect. I love it. What tools do you use to make the art and to get it in either tabletop simulator or to get it ready for print on demand? Like what tools do you use to make this game look so good?
I mean, because my wife and I both do freelance design professionally. I have been Adobe Creative Cloud customers for a long time, so we just have Illustrator and InDesign and Photoshop, and have been using. I mean, I've been using Photoshop since version 4 in like the 90s. Um, so that's just what we're used to. InDesign has a really neat feature called data merge, which lets you um, put all the information for your cards into a spreadsheet, and then it generates each card for you. So like this entire game is in a spreadsheet, um,
Oh my.
and it's this one was super complicated because every single image that you see on here and every number um, is a cell in a spreadsheet, and so it's pretty massive, even though it's only 18 cards for this deck. Um, but it would be very difficult to manage otherwise. And if you wanted to change something or adjust the layout, you can adjust it in one place and then just regenerate your cards, and it's a real lifesaver.
So if you're balancing this game, for example, you open up your spreadsheet and you say this is going to be two lightning bolts instead of one lightning bolt,
Yeah.
and then you hit export, and then it spits out. What does it spit out? Individual images?
Well, it's a few steps. InDesign is it's probably not worth going into the amount of detail it would take to fully describe it, but it's you've got your layout file. It grabs your spreadsheet and populates all the data and generates a page for each card. and then you export that as a PDF, and then as a PDF or as just like a handful of PNG files, for example. The game crafter requires all your artwork be uploaded as PNG. And then you might build, then I would have another InDesign file where I would take those individual cards and lay them out for the print and play file so that they're easy to just cut out all the cards. And then I have another InDesign file where they're all laid out for Tabletop Simulator, because Tabletop Simulator will just take a JPEG that has like a sheet of all your cards. So like there'll be like rows of all your cards just like butted right up against each other and then saved as a single JPEG. And then you import that into Tabletop Simulator and say this deck is, this many rows wide and this many, or this many columns wide and this many rows tall, and this is the number of cards, and then it just creates the cards for you.
That is wild. That is wild. So this whole game exists as one big like atlas of cards that Tabletop Simulator reads in.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, the horizontal cards are separate from these vertical cards, like the founder cards and these the time tracker and stuff like that. But yeah, there's two, and there's one sheet, one JPEG for the fronts and one JPEG for the backs. So there's four JPEGs for this entire game.
Nice. Well, let's keep looking at games.
Yeah,
I'm curious about Seashell Seashore. Should we look at that one?
sure.
And that's the first time I read it out loud and realized that it was a tongue twister, and I'm glad I got it
I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
right.
So this one was a funny spur of the moment kind of inspiration. Again, on that Button Shy Discord, someone was like, "How would you represent tides in a board game?" And then this whole game just kind of started forming itself in my mind.
I'm just having a
So
look.
the way this works, let's put four cards out here in a row. So in Seashell Seashore, you are wandering around a beach trying to find interesting things to make crafts out of. And so it's a set collection game. If you're familiar with Sushi Go, the scoring is very similar. And you each start the game with two scoring cards. Oops. And you look at them and you would choose which one you want to keep and which one you want to discard based on what's showing out on the beach right now.
Here, I'll be blue. There we go.
Okay. So I might go for this one because it has stones and there's a fair amount of stones here. And there's no shark teeth and there's only one sand dollar. So the rarity of the items is shown here on this first player card. So stones are the most common, then driftwood, then sea glass, then shells, then sand dollars, and then shark teeth.
Is sea glass a special thing, or is that like discarded glass that is in the sea?
Yes, that is what it is. But what makes it special is that it gets rolled around by the sand, and that it gets it looks almost like frosted glass a little bit, and the edges get all worn smooth. And so some of them look a little bit like gemstones kind of, or, and they're different colors and they're pretty. They're fun to find on the beach, even though it is waste. So what happens in this game is there are tides, cycles of tides, and during low tide, the water is out and there's stuff laying out on the beach that you can collect. And so during low tide, you can take two actions. I'm going to discard my card here. This is the one I'm going to keep. I'll put that in my hand. So you can discard one of your cards. Oh, or I'll drop it, apparently. That's funny.
Into the ocean.
This is what's weird about Tabletop Simulator. I can't tell if this is in my hand or not. Now it's in my hand. So you would choose one of your scoring cards here and discard the other one.
Oh, I am going to keep. I'm going to keep the one that's all sea glass. I'm going all in sea glass. So this one's discarded. like that?
Okay, so now during low tide, we each get 2 actions. And your actions are to either take a card or use one of your cards to score a set. Now we don't have any items yet, so our first 2 actions will just be to take cards. So I've got the first player card, so I will take this card first. And then you would take a card.
Oh, I want the sequence.
And I'll take the other stones card. So then you would take the last card. Okay, so now the tide switches. So now it is high tide and water is covering the beach. So we can't go and collect items, but we can make items, make our crafts with the things that we have collected. Or we can take another scoring card. So during high tide, you only get 1 action. So you can choose to either take another scoring card or you can score one of your sets. So if you look at if you want to zoom in on one of these scoring cards,
Mm-hmm.
which one are you looking at?
The one your cursor's over.
Okay. So the driftwood sculpture, if you have 3 driftwood and you cash it in during high tide, it's worth 6 points. If you cash it in during low tide, it's worth 4 points. So the number of items that you need are shown on the bottom there, and then the score that you get is in bold on the top. So you can score sets during low tide. They're just worth a little bit less. But during high tide, you have to choose between scoring a more valuable set or taking another scoring card, if that makes sense.
Ah, I see. So these icons at the bottom show what is on the other side.
Yeah, and so the reason that is because we only each get 1 action in this round, and so you might actually choose to not take a card here because you're like, oh, well, this one has 2 sea glass. Maybe Mike won't take that one, and I won't take it, and then like if we each take one of these cards, then during low tide, these ones actually stay here,
I see.
and
It's a little preview.
then you draw new ones from here, and this would be our next low tide round. So then I would pass this off to you, and you would be the first player to take a card. Like you would get the first action during low tide, and then also the first action during high tide.
Oh, this is the first player card, and it
First player
also
marker
shows you.
changes hands at the end of every tide cycle.
Ah, so I very much see the inspiration of how tide can fit into this game. Because when the tide is up, these are covered.
Yeah.
And oh, even the water is high tide. Oh, I see. It's all coming together. Nice. Very nice.
So, and it's neat too because as you score a set, so say I was going to take this set. I've got during high tide some stones here. I've got 6 stones. So that means, oh, I don't have quite enough. If I had 7, I would have scored 10 points. But then, so then I would take these. If I was going to score this set, I would take them and I'd actually discard them. And then as you need to draw more cards, these would come back. And so the cycles of the tides also involve, items kind of washing in and out onto the beach, different items showing up every round, but then the cards that you've used previously will come back again. And you might see their high tide side or you might see their low tide side. So it's very cyclical. It felt very thematic in that way.
Very nice. I like the having something worth points and the other side of it being rules. That reminds me of Point Salad,
Oh
which
yeah.
game I enjoy very much. The restriction of keeping this to 18 cards. Did you find that was quite restrictive? Like, is there anything you would have done differently without that restriction?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have put so many items on each card and
Mm.
so many different items on each card. So I might have then put, only one one type of item on each card, and maybe had 8 cards show up instead of 4.
Hmm.
This is very tight, but it fits really well. Like you can only have another thing I forgot to mention is you can only have 6 cards in your hand at any given time. So if you want to draw something, you've got 6 cards in your hand, you have to discard a card. Um, and so it works out just barely with 18 cards for there to be 2 people with up to 6 cards in their hand, which is 12 cards, and then 4 cards in the row, which is 16 cards, and then you've only got 2 cards left over, and one of them is the first player marker. So really, there's only 1 card left over. Um, so yeah, it's very tight component wise, but I very much enjoyed trying to figure out how to make a set collection game work with 18 cards, um, because set collection is generally not done with such a small number of cards. Like there just wouldn't be enough stuff to collect. But I think putting multiple items on each card really helps with that, and being able to just constantly, forcing the players to cycle through and discard cards or score sets to put them in the discard pile, and bring them back through the deck. It just works really well. And the goal is to just get to 50 points. Whoever gets to 50 points first, then the game ends at the end of that tide cycle. So if you cross the 50-point threshold during low tide, then you have to keep playing until the end of the next high tide. And then if the other person passes you, then they would still win.
Nice. Reminder to the viewers at home: throw your questions into the chat. We'd love questions. But I've got a question. In how did you balance this game? So, for example, this one only has 2 things on it. This one has 3 sticks, but a variety. Is it a matter of like throw spaghetti at the wall and play test it to see what sticks and like tweak it over time, or is there like do you have equations behind this that means
Yeah, there are equations, and I wanted to do some math for this one ahead of time. Lots of times it is just kind of throwing it at the wall and seeing what works, or just instinctually kind of figuring out how what you think will work, and then tweaking it afterwards. But this I actually did use again some more spreadsheets. Um, I figured out kind of how many of each item I would have. Um, and what the distribution of them would be. So I kind of wanted, I wanted 22 stones to be between 1 and 4 stones on each card. There's only 3 shark teeth, so there's obviously only 1 of those on each at any given time. But so some of them have like stones. There's up to 4. I think there's up to 4 for the driftwood as well. But then the shells and the sea glass, there's only 3. Between 1 and 3. No, the shells I think only have 2. Anyways, so then there's that kind of distribution to think about, but then there's also trying to figure out the scoring distribution, how many scoring opportunities there are for each type. And some of them have combinations, like some of the cards score, like this one uses 2 different items. So there's shells and stones. So trying to figure out how to balance all that, that was a little bit instinctual of like how many scoring opportunities there were for each different type of resource. But then I also had to figure out what the point value was for each of these. And so what I did was I knew that there was 22 stones in the deck, and if I made the stones worth 1 point each, then I kind of mathed out each of these, sort of divided them, and figured out what sort of the base value was for each of the different items, and then I used that to generate these values. How much points each set was worth.
So it was the goal to make it basically fair, so that like going for sea glass is kind of an equally good option in general than going for stones, but situationally the value is different.
Right. Yeah. And they do. I did increase the value a little bit as you got more because it is a little bit harder. The odds are against you more that you will get this many, like to get the third level of each set, and so those ones are valued a little bit higher. Oh no, wait, maybe I did that the other way around. I can't remember now. Um, but yeah, generally I wanted them to be fairly even. But the things like scoring a shark tooth is more rare. This one's got shark teeth on it, but yeah, if you've got 3 shark teeth, that's 18 points. So that's like a fairly valuable set to score 18 points in one turn.
Nice. We have some new cool kids in the chat. Feel free to ask questions. We're here with Mike Berg. He designs board games, and we're playing some of his games in Tabletop Simulator to show them off. Let's look at another game. Which you pick, Mike. What's the next one? What are we looking at?
Well, do you have toy makers there?
I do. Here it is.
So this one was a really interesting challenge. So this one was for one of the Button Shy challenges. So the description of the challenge for this game was to build a worker placement game with only 18 cards and no other components. And so when I first heard, I was like, "Oh, worker placement game, 18 cards. Oh, okay." And then he said no other components. I was like, "Wait a minute, are you serious? Like you can't have workers. You
Like
can't,
the card is a worker, I guess.
the cards have to be workers, and the resources are cards, and everything is a card." And so that was quite deliciously difficult. And what I really wanted to avoid with this game was using cards to keep track of resources. So
Mhm.
there's like it gets really fiddly, but you can put cards, like you lay another card on top of another card, and there's like a counter, like a scale sort of on the bottom card, and you slide it up or down, and that's how many of those resources you have. And then sometimes you could even slide it left and right as well, and so there's like a whole grid of really confusing resource tracking happening. So what I wanted to do with this is not have any of that. And um, one of the things that inspired me with this game is a game called Town Builder Coevorden, which came out a few years ago on Kickstarter, and I saw it and I loved the artwork and I loved the idea of it. And I think it was the first game that I ever backed on Kickstarter. And I was really happy that I did. It was really delightful and wonderful. And it taught me about multi-use cards. And so this game, I don't know how well you can all see this, but they have really beautiful cards. And the cards look really simple, but they're actually quite deceptively clever. Now, when you play this game, you're drafting cards from a row. And when you take a card, you either are taking the card just for the 2 resources, or sometimes there's only 1 resource at the top, and you use those resources to build other buildings. Now, if you take a card and you want to use it for a building, you actually take it and lay it on its side as a foundation. And this then is the only part of the card that matters. And these are the resources that are required to build the building. So you can take cards like this and lay them sideways and then gather these resources by taking other cards and holding them in your hand this way. And then you spend the cards from your hand as resources to complete these buildings, and then you turn the building right side up. And then you score the victory points here, and then you also get this cool special ability down here. So it is really clever use of cards as multiple things. And I would have to say that Toy Makers would not exist if I had not gotten Town Builder. And so the way Toy Makers works is now it's been a while since I played this. It's similar in that you take cards from here into your hand. No, hang on. Sorry, it's a worker placement game. So you take your worker out of your hand and you place it on top of a card. So each person takes their worker and places it on top of a card, and that's the resource that they're going to get. So you would get 2 wood and 2 cardboard. So then after you've taken turns placing your workers, you would take these cards back into your hand or drop them on the floor, as Tabletop Simulator seems to think is what I wanted to do. This is being funny. All my cards are showing upside down. Oh, there we go. I wasn't sitting in the right seat. Okay, so now I have these resources. I have 2 metal and 2 plastic. So what I could do is use my worker to build, for example, this card, which costs 1 metal and 1 plastic. So then I would place my worker on here, and we would each take turns placing 2 of our workers again, same way. And when I take this card now, I would actually rotate this, oops, and put it here in my buildings row. So now this is a building, and I have now a new spot to place workers, and you cannot place your workers on my buildings. But now, when I place my worker here, I get 1 cardboard and 2 wood. So your buildings all produce more resources than just the cards that are in the middle. So you're trying to build the buildings to get even more resources. Okay, does that make sense?
Delightful. Yeah.
So then once you've got some buildings, come on, Tabletop Simulator. Once you've got some buildings, there are also some, come on, brain, sorry. On the back of the card, I should say, is a toy. So on the back of every card is a toy, and this is worth 2 joy. Joy is like your victory points, okay? To build this toy, I have to spend the resources shown in this orange box. Okay, and this in the middle here shows you what the toy gives you. It gives you 2 joy and then 1 joy for every wheeled toy that you have.
So that matches
what's that's on the other. Yeah. Sorry.
So that matches what's on the back.
Yeah, this just shows you what's on the back. So 2 joy, and the type of toy is shown here in the corner, and then this little extra rule of like you get 1 extra victory point for every other toy that you make that has wheels. So like, where's a wheeled one? Here. So there's a dump truck. It has the little wheel icon in the corner. So if I also made this, then my card over here would be worth 3 points instead of just 2.
Mike, this is so nice. This is there's so much like goodness packed into these little cards.
All of the artwork was really fun to make for these guys.
So we have a question in the chat related. Shaner421 says, "Cool idea to prototype in tabletop sim. Does it normally take a while from idea inception to prototyping?" So how long does it take? Like, this is gorgeous. Do you just like sit down in a day and say, "Hey, I have an idea," and it pops out looking gorgeous? How much time does it take?
This is Toy Maker's prototype mode. So, remote control car, 5 joy, wheeled, electric, and outdoor. and there's the resources. And so this one, usually I do start on the computer, but I decided for this one I was gonna just throw some cards together with markers, and then I could just use pencil for the values for all of the what everything cost and all that kind of stuff. And then I fiddled with it like that for a bit, and then I just started making the art on the computer. So that one was very quick. I mean, the amount of time it takes to get a game to the table depends on the type of game. This one had a lot of numbers, so there was a lot of crunching and figuring out before I could actually get physical cards. But that again, I kind of whipped up those prototypes fairly quickly. Yeah, I mean, in making games, the getting it to the table is the most important thing. You can spend days and days getting the game in your head and running around in circles, or you can spend 10 minutes playing it, playing an actual physical prototype, and it's worth way more. Um, so I heard Richard Garfield, who's the creator of Magic the Gathering, say on a podcast. He said 10 minutes of prototyping is worth 10 hours of planning in your head. So just get it on the table. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Some of these games I kind of made in like a day or two, getting them working and playable. But I'm maybe a little bit of an exception. I kind of sometimes this stuff gets hooked into my brain, and I have a hard time thinking about other things. I don't know if that's a very good answer. Some games take longer. Some games go very quickly.
And some you've done some iterations on, right?
Oh yes, iterations are super important, and playtesting is important. And the game that you make in a day is not going to be a good game, almost guaranteed. So it's definitely important to playtest and hone the game. I tend to spend maybe a little bit more time than I should making the game look nice, instead of playtesting and tweaking the gameplay and stuff like that, which is something that a certain someone gives me a hard time about sometimes. He's the publisher for Button Shy Games. We've had this discussion many times on their Discord.
So you've mentioned publishers. So we talked about those three ways of getting your game in people's hands. There's tabletop simulator. There's a print and play PDF. So you print it, chop it up, put it on your table, and then print on demand. But there's still value in hitting those box stores or online box stores or getting like a production run. How
Oh,
how
certainly.
how does that happen? How do you do that? What's the process?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing tabletop simulator and print on demand and print and play, you're you're not really going to be hitting a very large audience. Print and play is pretty niche still. There's not a ton of people that do that, but it is still important and obviously super valuable for playtesting. And all of those methods that you just mentioned can be very helpful in getting a publisher. Certainly in getting your game play tested, which is definitely a requirement before you're going to ever get published. So yeah, just getting it in other people's hands is super important, and honing your game. And then as far as getting it in front of a publisher, usually what you will need to do is create something that's called a sell sheet, which is just a one-page PDF that is the elevator pitch for your game, basically. And doing a good sell sheet is definitely an art. It's very hard to distill a game, the game's essence, into something that you can convey clearly in one page that isn't a cluttered mess. So a sell sheet is kind of your first step to sending your game to a publisher. Obviously, you will need to have a print and play version of the game and a tabletop simulator version of the game, especially nowadays, when people are playtesting. Lots of publishers even are just playtesting games on tabletop simulator because they can't even get their playtest teams together because of COVID. So yeah, having a tabletop simulator mod, or there's other alternatives to tabletop simulator as well. Playingcards.io, I think, is one of them. There's more web-based ones that are a little bit, have some pluses and minuses for versus tabletop simulator. Anyways, I won't get into that. And the next thing you want to do if you want to get in front of a publisher is to make a pitch video for your game. And this is, again, generally fairly short, like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, describing your game, showing how it looks, a very, again, very basic overview of what the game is. And that's kind of your next step. So most publishers will look at sell sheets, and they might look at 100 sell sheets and choose 5 of them, and then they might look at the pitch videos for those 5 games out of 100, and then out of those they might only pick 1 or less. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a publisher. I don't know all the numbers, but I've done some reading about this, and so your pitch video is sort of your next step. If they like your pitch video, then they might call you and try to arrange a meeting, and then you might show them the game in Tabletop Simulator and talk about it some more. And then if they like it, even if they still like it, then they'll take it to their own playtest team. And if then after their playtest team beats it up and they still like it, then they'll come back to you and talk about contracts. That's sort of, I mean, every publisher is different, but that's probably a pretty standard flow.
Nice, awesome. I'm gonna ask you one more question before we go.
Only one?
Only one. One more question. It'll be juicy. So I know you work in video games. You've worked on video games. You've done game jams. You've made board games. What is oh, like I'm tempted to assume that video games are more difficult to make. So I'm gonna ask, what is a special challenge for making a board game that doesn't happen when trying to make a video game?
The physicality of it, I guess. That would be one thing, that the board games actually take up space on the table. And so you have to watch how many things you use, and also because everything you add to a game costs money. As many different types of trees to a video game as you want, and the game doesn't have to cost any more. But if you add, 100 cards to a game instead of 18, then that game is going to cost a lot more. If you add miniatures and large boards and terrain pieces and all that kind of stuff, the game is going to cost a lot more. So there's a lot of different considerations in that regard. And it matters too, because publishers are more likely to invest in a game that doesn't cost $60 to make one copy, just because of how many components you've added to it. So there's definitely an art to simplifying your game into the core fun of the game, and kind of throwing away all the rest of it. There's a lot of other things that are obviously harder to do with video or with board games as compared to video games. Keeping track of numbers and stats for things is difficult. Again, there's, like in ExoBase, there's only so much room on each card to show, an upgraded building. Whereas in video games, you can upgrade. You might have 50 levels of upgrades for a building, and the different types of resources it might give you. So again, just kind of focusing in and not giving the player too much to keep track of as well. There's a lot of video games do a lot of work for players in the background, making lots of calculations and presenting only the information that they need to know at the time. Whereas with the board game, the player is in control of the whole situation, and if they have to keep track of 10 different resource counters and health for 5 different enemies and 3 different members of their party and all their stats and equipment and all that kind of stuff, that's a different, very different play experience on a computer than it is in a board game.
That's something I'm really appreciating about these 18 card challenges is you can't have like all sorts of counters for all sorts of different things. Like it all has to fit just on these cards. I think that's really elegant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting and very fun challenge to try and take a game like this for example, like Toy Makers, and distill it down into 18 usable cards that people can still look at and understand and be able to make decisions about.
So my real last question for the night is, if people want to play these games, how can they find your stuff? How do you
can they
want
find your
them to
stuff?
contact
How can
you?
they
How do people get involved?
Well, I am fairly active on Twitter at We Heart Games. My itch page is the same, weheartgames.itch.io, and all of my games are on there. Some of them have been moved over to a PNP website called PNP Arcade, which is kind of cool. I just sort of started putting my games on there in the last couple of months, and so 4 of them are on there now. Some of them are paid. One of them is free still. Everything that's on my itch page is pay what you want, so free. Yeah, and I have another much larger board game that I'm working on my itch page as well, called Run Hack, which is a cyberpunk strategy board game, which is a much larger scale than all of these, so it's definitely more ambitious. There it is.
I tease that here. We're not going to dive in. This will be just a tease. People will have to look it up.
This would be a whole hour on its own. But yeah, this is a really fun, interesting strategy game where you're running around a city and hacking into servers and collecting fistfuls of dice and throwing them to hack through ice to get into the server and capture intel from other players and yeah, you get a bunch of cool program cards that give you special abilities and complete missions that give you victory points, and yeah, it's a good time.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm very, very happy with this game, and I'm hoping to once this ExoBase submission gets finished, I want to make pitch videos for both this and Seashell Seashore and try and find a publisher for both of those.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. On behalf of IGDA, thank you so much. On behalf of Games Explained, this has been a wild ride. I love it. Oh, where can people find my stuff? You can go to twitter.com/Matt Welk, which will appear in the chat in just a moment. And everything I do is linked there. My Twitter bio is basically just a bunch of ats that are like things you can go and discover what kind of weird things I've created or talked about or whatever. So thank you, Mike. Thank you again. Any final words, Mike?
And just keep playing games. Just keep playing games and making games. If you want to make board games, it's the easiest thing to just dive into. All you need is some paper and some scissors, and you can start making cards and pushing them around the table. And it's interesting to see what kind of systems will emerge.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for
Thank you.
stopping by. See you.